Welcome to the Anthropology in Business podcast, where you'll learn about the many ways anthropology is applied in business and why business anthropology is one of the most effective lenses for making sense of organizations and consumers. Through conversations with leading anthropologists working in advertising, marketing, consumer behavior, organizational culture, user experience, and many other roles, you'll learn firsthand what it means to do business anthropology and how the work differs from academic anthropology. We'll discuss issues like the pace and depth of research in business, our visibility and influence as practitioners, and what we can do to build our brand. We will also focus on the value and impact of our research in business so that we can help business leaders understand why they should be hiring anthropologists. I'm your host, Matt Artz, a business anthropologist specializing in design anthropology and working at the intersection of product management, user experience, and business strategy. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Anthropology in Business podcast. I'm Matt Artz. I'm here today with Cathleen Crain, managing partner of LTG Associates, which is now 40 plus years in running. I've heard before that you were essentially the first consulting firm in the space, so I'd love to talk about that. Also, president of Napa, National Association for the Practice of Anthropology, which has a lot of interesting things going on, especially recently. So also want to get into that. So Cathleen, thanks for joining me today. Would you mind by telling everybody how you got interested in anthropology?
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here. I was going to go to medical school since I was 8 years old. No, not anything else. And I ended up at a university where I had more credits than I needed, but needed to get some more in order to get back into the pre-med system. And they said, well, you can start over, or you can use your credits and you can figure out, classes that you could take, which would be interesting. So I looked around and I saw there was physical anthropology, and I thought, well, that looks like it could be interesting. So I took some of the beginning courses and very quickly found that it was fascinating. It was like I had found a place where people thought like I did, where there was this synthetic thing happening, and you were bringing the context and the content and history and culture all together at once. And I became fascinated. And slowly I drifted away from medicine and into anthropology. It was a good choice.
Yeah. And, I think from looking at your background, it seems like you didn't lose interest in medicine, because it seems like you've been involved in projects, broadly in that space. But so after getting your degrees, how did you realize that you could be applying anthropology? Because I would presume that wasn't the way it was being taught.
It wasn't being taught that way, but I went to a fabulous 4-field school, which was straight line. If you were coming through, you were going on into an academic position. And I walked in saying, I'm not going to teach. I'm not staying any place for very long. I have work to do, and it's not here. And the faculty was wonderful. They were absolutely brilliant, and they nurtured me and they supported me. There wasn't a medical anthropology program when I went into my master's degree, and so my major chair and I created it, and he helped me get courses at the medical school, and we created a curriculum, and he taught me. And I mean, you don't get much better support than that. And so I was always going out. I was always on my way through. And the very first job I had out of university was another graduate student came into the office one day, and she said, somebody's looking for you. And I said, I beg your pardon. She said, there was an ad in the newspaper this morning and they're looking for you. And I said, what do you mean? She said, they're looking for an anthropologist who has counseling background. Well, there were 6 of us. There were 6 of us then. but I applied for the job. It was at a regional alcoholism treatment center, and I got the job, and I was, as far as we know, the first clinical anthropologist in Southern Ontario. I'm American. I went to school in Canada. And so, crack out of the box, I was into being an anthropologist working in a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multidisciplinary setting. And it was amazing. And we got to use our skills to create an astonishing treatment program that really worked with and for the clients who came to the program. And that was part of my job, was to make sure that it fit them. So I never looked back.
And so I'd like to come back to that job in just a second, but out of curiosity, why did you know that you didn't want to stay in academia? Like why did you have the drive to go out and do something?
Well, I'd always planned to be a physician. I'd always planned to be in the world doing things that would make a difference. When I found anthropology, I've said frequently that the idea that you could make change in systems and in cultures was just a siren song for me. So it was never on my radar. I love teaching, and I'm a full professional track at the University of Maryland, College Park. I do one seminar a year or something, but they have this cadre of professionals who relate to the program. I love teaching. It wasn't my calling, and I saw the tools and skills of anthropology as being potent in addressing complex, what we call wicked problems. So always on a path through.
Yeah, interesting. And so in this first job, you said you sort of that the program was very successful. So what were you doing at that time to really account for the needs of all the different individuals who were coming through? What did you do that I guess was different than the sort of norm?
I joined the program as it was being planned, which was wonderful. And the center had brought together people from multiple disciplines. There was a sociologist, there was a psychologist, there was an anthropologist, there were, clinical people and so forth. And what we did was we planned a treatment program based on the best information about treatment at that time. And one of the things that the sociologist and I did was we created a cultural history of interview. And everyone who came to the program was interviewed by one of us. And it could be 3 hours. And it went through creating a history, their context, understanding, cultural drivers, if there were those that were important to them. And then we were therapists, but we also acted as consultants to the other therapists. And so we would brief them on their clients once we'd completed this assessment. And we'd say, okay, here's some key issues we think for this person. And here are places we wouldn't advise you to go with this person. You need to understand what the triggers are here. And it was an amazing kind of tool for a therapist to have, was this kind of, solid history that was fresh and focused. And you had the person who had taken it and had created a relationship with the new client in that relationship as needed. I think that was my major contribution, was doing that. I was also part of the therapeutic team. But it was, we were all young and as smart as we could be, and doing the very best job that the current research, the current information supported.
So, I don't know the counseling space, so I'm just going to ask, was that very, was it non-traditional at the time, or was anybody else doing anything similar? So why do you think the leadership there saw this value in anthropology and sociology? And is there anything to learn from that, so that we can apply today?
I think that at that moment there was a new interest in multidisciplinary teams, that the old model was not making headway. And certainly there were pockets of innovation. Toronto was a pocket of innovation, New York, other places where pretty important experimentation was going on. And I think the time was simply right for that to happen. How they determined that an anthropologist would appear in the middle of this is, I don't know. I never got that story. I was just grateful to have won the position. There were 200 applicants, and I came out with the prize. I was very grateful.
Yeah, no, that's great, and obviously sent you on a nice career. What did that teach you at the time? Because obviously that was also a nice opportunity for you to work in that kind of team.
Oh yeah. I'm not sure anthropology was yet at the team space. Let me say that affirmatively. Anthropology was not in the team space at that point. We were still, there were lots of lone wolves wandering around doing their own thing. And the need, I suppose, on reflection, the need to be a team player in order to get the job done was something that was not entirely new to me, but the intensity of it was. The depth of the teaming was new to me. We knew each other, we talked with each other, we regularly consulted about all of the clients. It was important to have that kind of support, but it was also an important lesson to me in relying on others to be full professionals and being one myself.
So if we could fast forward, so, you move on from this role, and I think, there's some other things in your background on LinkedIn, but eventually you found your own organization. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about, I guess, before we get back to maybe the team aspect of that and what your work looks like today, just a little bit of that journey, just so we understand, why you got to the place where you decided you wanted to have your own firm?
I'll try and figure out how to summarize it. I was working in San Francisco during the influx of refugees from Southeast Asia and from Eastern Europe and from Haiti and from Cuba. And I was running refugee programs there. And my anthropology was useful every day, but it wasn't called anthropology. I don't think I actually talked about myself as an anthropologist, but I would certainly, if anybody asked, I'd say I had degrees in anthropology. But it wasn't a persona. It wasn't my life. And I met this interesting person who came to interview me about one of the programs that we were running, which had a novel form, and it was being very successful, and I had helped to create that. And they were doing research on interesting programs serving Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And we discovered that we had much in common. We became colleagues. We became friends. And then I was invited to participate in a piece of research that was going on. This was really community-based research intended to create services. And it suddenly dawned on me that we were doing anthropology. He was an anthropologist. I was an anthropologist. And it was like we had fallen into the mother tongue, and we could both speak and enact our anthropology. I can't tell you how comfortable that was. And that we both had a vision of making a difference in the world. And that when we were both ready to move on from our positions at that point, we said, there are things that we think can be done better. And so why don't we create that particular circus? And people ask me, why did you start a business? And I tell them, I don't know. Was it a great idea? I don't know. Was the collaboration? Absolutely. Never a doubt about that. And we are the oldest anthropologically based consulting firm in North America. That's because nobody else was doing it. And we turned 40 in January. So that launched us. Has it always been a smooth path? No. We've employed hundreds of people. We've been a big business. We've been a small business most of the time because we frankly prefer that. We want to be able to do the work. And when you get to be big, you manage people. You bring in the work. You watch other people do it. Not as interesting as doing the work. And so we shrunk back to being a small business because it allows us to do the work.
Yeah, that's interesting. So to kind of take it back to the start there, so you basically start this partnership, and you have now a type of collaboration that is a little bit different than you had previously, in that it's multiple anthropologists instead of working with other disciplines. So that in itself is a little bit different than you previously experienced. And I know you already said that that it was very comfortable, and obviously it's been working quite well if it's lasted 40 years. But what did you learn in those early days of really working with another anthropologist, say in the process of collection and analysis? Because again, we're not really kind of like taught to operate that way. So how do you kind of find common ground? And, what did you learn from that?
Well, so much. First of all, I was trained as a medical anthropologist, and he was trained as a psychological anthropologist. Worlds apart. I was bones and he was brain. And we really had two very interestingly different perspectives. And almost immediately, it was clear that while we had great synergy, we also had to do a lot of negotiating over how things would happen, what the meaning of things were. Meaning was. And that was okay because we were comfortable with each other and safe. We could do that. There wasn't a competitiveness between us. Now, fast forward, we've employed hundreds of anthropologists. We've employed lots and lots of other people. We're an equal opportunity employer. We've had psychologists and sociologists and, DRPHs and all kinds of people, each of whom brings their very own perspective, as well as their very own bias about what anthropology is. And so we've worked very hard at being good team leaders, at modeling good teaming, not having to be competitive, not having to always have the credit, making sure that people got credit. If you write something, you get credit for it. If you write on it, you get credit for it. If you're part of the team, you get credit for it. And we had people come from, very abusive backgrounds, where, they had been used and abused. And, it took some people a very long time to understand that we were not going to do that to them. That's taken a suspension to make that happen with lots of different personalities and lots of different disciplines. I think that may have been one of the hardest things to do, other than having a business and living within budgets when you're an anthropologist and everything's bigger. Everything's more complicated. Well, it is, but not always what the client wants to pay for.
So speaking of clients, at that time, what was it like for you doing client development? Was it challenging to sell, anthropology?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, truth be told, have we always said the word anthropology? No. We've said social scientists. We've said evaluators, because we often use the tools of evaluation. And we work very hard, no matter what we call ourselves, to demonstrate the added value of anthropology, even if the client doesn't understand it, and then we point it out. This is what you get. This is the difference when you bring anthropologists to the table. I was interviewed for Fast Company magazine 100 years ago, and the interviewer we had a number of conversations, and she was lovely, and we had a great time. And finally, in frustration, one day she said, "So, we've talked and talked and talked. So what's the difference? What difference do you bring?" And I said to her, it's kind of like the difference between having a black and white television and having a colored TV. We bring the color. We bring the context. We bring the meaning and the culture. It's more nuanced. It's in greater depth. And I still have trouble explaining it in simple ways to people, what the difference is. But that was the best I came up with on the fly.
That really resonates with us, and I think it's a good way of explaining it. But it also seems like the discipline as a whole obviously has this problem, and that an explanation like that, while it sounds great, it still might leave some people wondering what it means, especially when they don't understand something like, culture, or even maybe what we really mean by context. And so, just to go back to, my question, I asked if it was hard to sell, and we kind of had a little joke there, which I think we all appreciate. But there was also, it seems to me, kind of like a glory period, maybe like 90s, early 2000s, where it really seemed like there was very large projects, large budgets going to much bigger, really field studies than we're doing today. That's my understanding from talking with many people. And it seems like in that period, it was maybe easier to sell the kind of full package. And so did you also have that experience?
Yes and no. We take our tools into particular topics and contexts. And so we've lived through different epochs of our work. During the 90s and into the 2000s, we did a lot of work in HIV and AIDS. That was a place where policymakers and program developers quickly saw the critical nature of understanding people's vision of who they were. There was a lot of failure before that understanding was had, and people were dying. And it was grim. And not unlike a lot of other healthcare issues, they're cultural in nature. And so with that, there was an upswing in anthropologists and other social scientists being engaged in HIV/AIDS prevention and mitigation. And in terms of topics, that was a lot of what we were doing, but it wasn't exclusive. We were working in intimate partner violence prevention, culturally, contextually, very important. And I think there has been an upswing in policymakers understanding that the simple answers aren't effective answers. I think today we have a less difficult time convincing more people of the need. It's still a nuanced answer. People come to us, and it helps to be 40 years deep, and it helps to be old and loud and proud about being anthropologists. That also has gotten us sidelined at times, where people wanted something. How does somebody say? We wanted something a little more standard. It's probably good you chose standard then. But people do seek us out. And when we bid a project, we are generally very clear, if we can be, about the added value that we will bring as anthropologists. There has certainly been more interest and attention paid to diversity and being able to reach people effectively. That was not the case decades ago. It was kind of one size fits all. And being out in the wilderness saying one size doesn't work for all wasn't always a popular thing to do and say. It didn't matter. I mean, we were loud and proud about it, but it wasn't always an effective message. It is much more so today than it was then. And that's a space where anthropologists should be involved. I think there's nobody who doesn't need an anthropologist. I think there are two rate limiters. One is that people don't know very well what we are and what we can do. And very often we as anthropologists don't know what we can do. And we lack imagination and kind of the ability to see ourselves in those situations and say, of course we can do that. Of course that makes sense. And those are also the most dangerous words that we've ever spoken, where somebody says, can you do this? And we say, sure, we can do that. Then you have to figure out how to do it and do it well. So those are words we have rued on occasion.
So why do you think there is this, sort of scenario where anthropologists don't think they can do certain things?
This is one of those things I'm going to say that I will say carefully. I have lots of friends who are academics and who are really good teachers. I think that the model of training for many anthropologists is very focused. It's very tight. And it's an old model. It's still a model that's effective for some people. But for those of us who want to be practicing and professional anthropologists, it's not as effective. You need tools. You need to be able to think globally. you need to be able to look at a problem or look at an issue and begin to understand where the edges and layers are. And you don't necessarily need to be an expert in the content to do that. And this is one of the tensions I think that we have as anthropologists. There are content people, and that's not good or bad. They're people who concentrate on a field, and they get really good at it. When I worked in refugee services, I could speak refugee. ORR put out an RFP for the MAAs to do ESL. It was a whole context, and you knew the entire policy arena. You knew the resettlement arena. You knew the camp arena. You knew everything about. And so you were a content expert. And that's important that there be content experts. But there also need to be tool experts, people who can bring a set of tools and work inside and out of the content, because the content can also be stultifying. The content can become concretized, and opportunities and challenges may not be readily apparent if you're living inside of it. So both are necessary. I think we've been more tool people. We bring a toolkit and we learn the content, but we are never going to be of. And we are not those people. And that's both a strength and a challenge, because we're always learning. We're always absorbing at very high speed so that our tools are more useful. But it also makes us really good students, knowing and having the humility of always having to learn.
So when you speak of tools, I presume methods is included in that, but the word tools can probably be, maybe misunderstood by somebody. So how would you define that for, in the context of what you're talking about?
Now, the toolkit of a good anthropologist is going to be everything they learned at school, university, college. And then it's going to begin to expand if you're going to be a professional and practicing anthropologist, because you're going to have to morph almost continuously. I said before, we learned monitoring and evaluation, and they are really good tools for anthropologists. We do a lot of assessments as anthropologists. We don't always know how to talk about it. And assessment, monitoring, and evaluation are just kind of a natural package of skills, of tools that are very useful moving into a new arena. I don't know about anybody else, but I wasn't taught to interview. I wasn't taught observation. I couldn't do what I do without knowing how to do those. And over the years, we've taught the skills of observation, of monitoring a situation, of interviewing people. Somebody saw a video that we did the other day and said to the other managing partner, "How did you get people to talk about those things?" And he said, "We're good anthropologists. We were genuinely interested in what they had to say. We were respectful of them, and they knew why we were doing what we were doing, how we were going to use it, and that they would continue to have ownership of what they gave us." And that's really important. So it's the methods you learned in school. It's the methods you didn't learn in school that you need as a professional practicing anthropologist. It's the tools and skills that are going to take you into new arenas. Learning the tools of design. I wasn't taught those in school. bless Acumen for their free courses. You know, we keep feeding people into their courses because they're wonderful. So, is there a standard toolkit? There certainly are some standard tools, some standard methods. The anthropologic philosophy, and I know this will not sit well with some, is a critical tool. We live and die by it. It imbues everything we do. And I was talking with an undergraduate who was thinking to take some anthropology. I said, okay, you need to understand a couple of things that are going to be kind of different when you hit your first anthropology course, because the perspective is going to be different. And you need to ride with it until you understand it. And if you don't understand it, come back and talk with me. But also talk with your professor, because it's very different. And even as it's very different, it is critical to what we do. If you don't get that, you're not really going to be a good anthropologist.
Great. And so you said you've hired hundreds over, the years. And I know you've shrunk back down, so I'm not sure how much of that is more recent, but is there anything that really stands out to you right now as a gap in training that anybody listening should even try to acquire, themselves if they're not getting it in school?
Writing, clear writing, standard English writing. Please, don't impress me, inform me. It's really critical. I think in a lot of schools, people are taught that they're going to succeed by being impressive and by sharing the fullness of what they know. My universe doesn't look like that. We were working with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it was a very big project. It was multi-year, and it was very important. And there was going to be a policy piece at the end that was going to be widely distributed. And we gave them a 500-page report. And we did a briefing, and they said, we'd like you to make the report shorter. And we said, how short? And they said 25 pages. And we said, holy cow. Okay, so we did that. And then they said, yeah, we'd like you to make this 10. We said, okay. And it ended up being 2 pages. Now, each iteration was useful. And we did say to them, you're losing texture, you're losing color, you're losing depth with each contraction. But the lesson also is, when you're trying to affect policy, you have about 30 seconds, and you better be using those 30 seconds well.
Now, I think that brings up an opportunity, though. So there are, of course, we always need to know our audience, but there are often multiple audiences, and that means there can be different, formats for different groups. So, I'm going to use this to sort of maybe fast forward to Napa a bit, and maybe not just Napa, but I'll say the anthropological community at large, all of the organizations, it does seem like all the organizations have been kind of doing things the way they've always done them. Now, Napa just released, and we can talk about it more in just a second, but just released the Snappa Shots, which is more podcast or, or sort of vodcast video version. Where I'm going with this, though, is, it seems like there is a need to be reaching different audiences today and communicating beyond just journals and beyond just sort of the textual. So have you learned anything, in the practice of business or with the work that you've done with Napa that, that there's some takeaways there of how you can take some research and then repackage it for different groups?
I love doing briefings. I love, we always have to give our clients a report of some sort, and it's often a negotiated package. And they have clients and they have funders, and sometimes we work directly for the funder and sometimes we work for an intermediary. Knowing your funder and knowing what they expect. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation wanted standard English, compact. If you're working with the CDC, figure out what the CDC thinks is a brilliant report. And then negotiate a briefing. The opportunity to talk with people about what you've learned creates a whole new avenue of communication. You can have pictures, you can have conversation, you can speak in more depth about some things, you can highlight things, you can have your team show up. The opportunity to speak with people directly is a real boon in what we do. I don't know how many reports have been delivered and turned into doorstops. Briefings change the way people see things. And so we are always delighted when we can get in front of an audience, whether it's the World Health Organization in Geneva, or it's the, U.S. Agency for International Development, or it's the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, or it's a group of CBOs, community-based organizations. The opportunity to talk with people and to have an exchange about the meaning of what you've learned is astonishing. So I work at engineering that at every possible turn to do that. And certainly if we're working for the CDC, we're far more formal in our report development. We will always show our methods. We will always talk about how we design something, how we gather data, the limitations in the data, how we it created confidentiality, how we protected our participants, how we analyzed it. Not everybody wants to hear that. And I've had our method sections. We have a standard way of showing things, which is to talk about the problem or the issue, talk about how we planned to deal with it, a method section, then what we learned, and then the results. Well, you're multi-pages deep by the time you got there. We were working with NASA, and our program officer was brilliant, absolutely wonderful. And one day she said to me, Kathleen, bluff, bottom line up front. And if I forgot that when we were working on this report, which was for policymakers as well as line staff at NASA, she'd say, bluff, damn it. I said, got it. And our entire method section ended up in an appendix. But it's how we make the case for trusting what we're going to tell you. And she said, we wouldn't hire you if we didn't trust you. And if they're worried about the methods, they'll look in the appendix.
Which is, an interesting perspective, but I wonder how much that applies to everybody versus,
It doesn't. It doesn't,
Yeah. You have name recognition now. So how do you think, somebody or a group of anthropologists who are, earlier in their career trying to navigate these problems, how do you think they should approach it? Or what do you think, any thoughts for sort of younger consultants?
Oh, I think absolutely show your methods up front. It creates confidence that you had a process that makes sense, that's recognizable, and that you can link everything you learned back through those methods. I think it's critical. I think, sometimes you're going to do it in 2 pages. Sometimes it's going to be 10. Throw some of it into the appendix. But I think you have to build confidence at the very beginning of a report, because you're going to be telling people very complex things, and sometimes you're going to be telling them things they don't want to learn. It's hard to hear about a program or a policy. I also like to use other people's voices, which can be and that's in, the learnings and findings. I like to use the voices of the constituents, whether those are patients in a clinic or those are line staff at NASA. Those voices are going to have far more effectiveness within the organization or within the policy arena than us nattering on in the narrative. We don't use their voices exclusively, but we use them a lot to make a point, to tell a story that supports a finding. And very often I find clients coming back to those stories and saying, I stopped in my tracks. I stopped breathing for a minute. That was astonishing.
It's sort of now pivoting forward and just trying to build on that idea of really convincing people and appreciating your role at Napa. What do you think we all need to be doing to really convince the business community at large that they should be looking at anthropologists and not psychologists or, economists or whatever it may be, any other, social scientist that is hot? What do you think, based on all your years in business and how you've sold it, and based on just, your interactions at Napa and whoever you communicate with, you think there's anything that we should be doing?
There's so much that we need to do. First of all, we need to train ourselves to be confident in our skills. And part of that is having a group around us that has skills and says, yes, those are real. Those are important. To have a reference group, to have a home where you can go and you can talk about the complexities of what you're doing. And you can say, I'm not communicating this as effectively as I should be. The client still isn't getting it. Or having a reference group where you can say, how do I convince CDC that this is going to be important? What are my key arguments that say this is important to CDC and to its constituents? It's critical that we have the skills and we be able to point at them, that we have competence. And we say, we have competence in these areas. And this as a whole brings us the ability to do this and this and this, and to be able to point to the myriad successes that anthropology has. And here's another critical problem that we have, is that those of us who are professional and practicing anthropologists, there's not really an arena in which we talk about what we do. I'm going to put in a quick plug for the Praxis Awards, which is the Washington Association of Professional Anthropologists. They recognize professional praxis once every 2 years. There's a new book coming out in May that's going to have 10 years of praxis projects. There are very few places where we have the opportunity to talk about what we do. Now, part of the challenge we run into is that our findings are not always public. Our clients are not always prepared to have our work be public knowledge. And it's not because they're embarrassed by us, it's that this goes to policy and program improvement. So it isn't necessarily in the public arena. But creating space for us to talk with one another and to be public with the difference that we create, I think is really important. And my passion is health and human services. You've heard me talk about other areas, but that's my real passion. And how we raise the profile of anthropologists in health and human services so that everybody knows that if you're working with a new group, if you are creating a new program, if you have a new issue, if you have a challenge, you need an anthropologist in the mix. Maybe not the only person, but you need an anthropologist in the mix because we are different. We bring a different perspective and different skills. So I think we need a platform. We need a platform to communicate on a regular basis. We don't communicate with each other on a regular basis. We don't have a platform. And now I'm going to do a commercial for Napa. The National Association for the Practice of Anthropology is the only professional and practicing, solely focused organization. And 2 years ago, we reconceptualized, we re-envisioned Napa because we had fallen into kind of a quiescent state. And we have a new strategic plan, we have a new mission, a new vision, and we have reorganized ourselves, our organization. Our purpose is to serve professional and practicing anthropologists and to create a home for them where they have a reference group, where they can build their skills, where they're understood, where they can come and talk with other people who will say, yeah, I get that. I got that. And here's somebody else you can talk to, where we can be a hub for people to find others that they need to know. You mentioned snapshots, which is one of the things we are clear about is that there's not enough information in the public about what we do as professional and practicing anthropologists. And so Napa started this short form video series and started with the officers of the organization, and we're going through the committees, and now we're doing the founders, and there's going to be kind of this ripple out, and there are going to be other kinds of efforts to create the opportunity to listen to anthropologists. We think this is going to be very important for the classroom. There are so many professors who are struggling to talk about the options and to create kind of an interesting, understandable way of seeing what professional and practicing anthropologists do. So we're thinking it's going to be a tool for that. We're going to start creating competency-based trainings. Don't know how to... You weren't taught how to interview? Well, let's talk about interviewing. And let's create a competency-based training so that professional and practicing anthropologists can be sure that they're doing the very best interviews possible. This can also be something students take if it's not taught in their coursework. So we're really kind of rapidly expanding our offerings because our purpose is to serve. If we're not serving, we don't have a purpose. And so over the next year and a half, we're going to be rolling out all kinds of new projects, new kinds of efforts to engage and support our people, the people we serve, the people we are. And so Napa looks very different. Napa's younger than it used to be. I am truly the senior person at Napa now. And the next president is a full generation younger than I am. It's more diverse. It's younger. It's professional. I think Napa's going to have a great time.
So that all sounds good, but I'm going to just sort of go back almost to like a previous question and ask, like, do you think Napa needs to play a role in communicating outside of anthropology?
I think that that's a bridge a little too far for us at the moment because we're busily we've completely reimagined. We're going through that kind of developmental period when you figure out what you didn't plan all the way and you have to go back and patch. And we're creating products and figuring out where those are going to go and how we're going to serve. But absolutely. A first step that Napa has taken is to create collaborations with all of the other anthropologically based organizations. There is no reason why we aren't all hand in glove. And so one of Napa's goals was to be in connection, in collaboration with SFAA, with the Careers Readiness Commission, with Ethno Breakfast, with the LPOs, with WAPA, with High Plains. We've always had kind of a cousin relationship, and we're hoping we bring that together into, regular family conversations. We're currently looking at working with COPA. We have to be coherent about who we are writ large, and then have messages that we can take outside. And I'm always pleased when somebody outside anthropology wants to know more. I think that's very exciting. And creating those opportunities, I think, is the next step.
Well, I certainly look forward to seeing some of those. For anybody who's listening that might be interested in getting more involved in what Napa's doing today, especially all of the new offerings, what should they do?
Well, there are two ways of getting involved. If you are a student or you are not making a lot of money, we're a section of the American Anthropological Association. And so in order to be a member, you have to come through the AAA, you have to join. AAA has made it very inexpensive for students and new professionals to join, and Napa has made it equally easy in terms of cost to join. So we would love to have people come join. There is a lot of work to be done, and we are looking for talented people to come in and work with us, to take up, trainings, to take up video, to do things that are going to be helpful to our people, professional and practicing anthropologists, and for those who train and mentor them. And I'm not disregarding them. We need to be helpful to them. We need to help them have a vision and to have the tools by which they can train new and young professionals. So that's the straight shot. Join AAA, join Napa, come out and play. Tell us what we're doing well. Tell us what we need to do better. We have lots of committees, and we have lots of room for people to participate. You can also participate on committees if you're not a member. You can't lead a committee or run for office. But we have wonderful people who don't feel like they can make the monetary commitment, who are very active in Napa. But join, participate, volunteer, go to our website, look at the committees. All kinds of fascinating stuff going on, and the website is changing almost daily. So if it doesn't look up to date, it's because we're still changing it, because things are happening.
Well, very exciting times for Napa. And if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, just to learn more about your work or to pick your brain, is there any place that's convenient?
Well, you can president@napa.org, president@practicinganthropology.org for the next 6 months, and then I'll give that up and I'll be past president. We have a brand new website that is going to go up in May. We're very excited about it. It is way out of the box. And we're still struggling with some of the concepts to make sure they're not so far out of the box that they don't make sense to people. So that'll go up in May, and people will be able to get me through info@ltgassociates.com.
Well, Kathleen, thanks very much. Appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for listening to the Anthropology in Business podcast. To learn everything you need to break into business anthropology and why business anthropology is one of the best lenses for contributing to business success, visit my website at mattartz.me, where I cover many topics related to business anthropology and beyond. There you will find all the podcast episodes, blogs, and news. Please like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.